Put the tracker on a Sunday. Magnetic case, about the size of a thick matchbook, snapped under the rear bumper of her Civic in 11 seconds flat. I'd ordered it off Amazon 3 days earlier, told myself it was for peace of mind. Told myself I wasn't the kind of man who did things like this. I was 31 years old, a licensed electrician running my own small crew out of Raleigh, North Carolina. My wife and I had been married 6 years. I thought I knew what our life looked like. Turned out I only knew what she'd let me see. Her name was the first thing I learned about her at a mutual friend's barbecue 7 years ago. She was laughing at something across the yard, and I thought, I need to know that person. We dated 11 months, got engaged at the Blue Ridge Parkway overlook she'd pointed out from a car window once and said, "Someday I want to stand right there." I remembered. That was the kind of husband I was. The remembering kind. We lived in a 2-bedroom house in Garner, about 20 minutes southeast of downtown. Her uncle owned the property next door, a converted garage apartment he rented out short-term. Quiet place, mostly empty. She visited him there 3-4 times a week. Normal enough. He was in his late 60s, walked with a cane. She'd bring him food sometimes, check on prescriptions. I thought it was generous. I told people that. My wife is generous. Then she started coming home late from those visits. Not hours late. 40 minutes, an hour. Small enough to dismiss once, then twice, then every single time. I asked her about it in March, casually, standing in the kitchen while she unloaded the grocery bags she picked up on the way back. "Oh, we just got to talking. You know how he is." I did know how he was. I also knew the drive from that apartment to our house took 6 minutes. I'd timed it without telling her. 6 minutes, door to door. She was unaccounted for somewhere between 40 and 70 minutes, several times a week, and the explanation was always some variation of, "We just got to talking." I didn't say anything else. I went back to the living room and I sat with it. That's the thing nobody tells you about suspicion. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It just takes up space, quietly, until one day you realize it's the largest thing in the room. By April, I'd noticed the pattern completely. She always left around 1:30 in the afternoon on her days off from the clinic where she worked as a medical billing coordinator. Back by 3:15 at the latest when I was home, but on the 2 days a week, I was running jobs in Apex. 40 minutes from the house. She didn't come back until nearly 4:30. I know because I started checking. Not confrontationally, just checking. Husband things, I told myself. Reasonable husband things. I ordered the tracker on a Thursday. It arrived Saturday. I put it on Sunday morning while she was showering. The first 3 days showed exactly what I expected. Home to apartment, apartment to grocery store home. I sat in my truck reviewing the map data at 10 p.m., feeling like the most paranoid man alive. Maybe I was making something out of nothing. Maybe this was just what exhausted marriages felt like from the inside, and I was catastrophizing. Then Wednesday happened. Her phone showed her at the apartment from 1:34 p.m. She texted me at 2:00. At her uncle's, "He's having a rough day. Might be a little late." I replied, "No worries. Take your time." The tracker showed her vehicle stationary at the apartment address. That part was true. At 2:37 p.m., the vehicle moved. Not toward our house, not toward the grocery store. It moved north on Route 70, then east on a road I didn't immediately recognize. I pulled it up on the map. A storage facility. One of those orange and white self-storage places off a commercial stretch near the county line. The car sat there for 51 minutes. She came home at 4:22. Apologetic. He was having a rough day. She'd stayed extra to help him with dinner. I said I was sorry to hear that. I asked how he was doing. She told me he'd seemed better by the time she left. She was completely composed. Eye contact steady, voice soft, concerned daughter energy radiating off her the way it always did when she talked about him. I had known this woman for 7 years. I could not find a single crack. That night I lay in the dark for 3 hours trying to think of any legitimate reason a person drives to a storage unit and sits there for 51 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon, alone. While telling her husband she's helping an elderly relative with dinner. I couldn't find one. I called my cousin the next morning. He's 2 years older than me, works in commercial insurance in Charlotte. The kind of guy who handles money for a living and thinks sideways about problems. I drove to a gas station, 2 miles from the house, and called him from my truck with the engine running. I told him everything, starting with the late returns and ending with the storage facility. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what's in your name right now? I ran through it. Joint checking, joint savings. My business account. Small operation, but I'd had a decent year. The equipment loan I paid off in February. And then the thing that made my stomach shift, a joint investment account we'd opened 2 years ago at her suggestion. A smart move, she'd said. Better returns than a savings account, easy to manage together. We'd put $60,000 into it. It had grown since then. I hadn't checked the balance in 4 months because she handled the logins. My cousin exhaled slowly. Check that account today. In person, not online. I called the investment firm at 8 a.m. sharp, drove to the branch office in Cary rather than dealing with it over the phone. The advisor I met with, a thorough woman named Ms. Pratt, pulled up the account and went still for just a second. The kind of stillness professionals learn to control but never fully master. Mr. Hayes, there have been several withdrawal requests initiated over the past 6 weeks. She turned her monitor slightly toward me. 4 separate transfers, each under $10,000. Structuring, I would learn later, is the practice of keeping transfers below the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. $38,000 moved in increments of $9,000, $9,000, $9,500, and $10,500. The last one had been flagged automatically. Where did it go? I asked. A third-party account. The name on the receiving end was a limited liability company registered in Georgia. She pulled up the authorization records. All 4 requests had been submitted using her credentials from devices and locations consistent with her usual activity. I asked Ms. Pratt to freeze the remaining balance, $24,000, and not to accept any further instructions without a second in-person verification from me. She nodded like she'd seen this before. I left and sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could drive. $38,000. Moved to a shell company in Georgia. By my wife, using her own login, from her own devices, in small enough increments to avoid automatic flags. This was not impulsive. This was not a mistake. This was something that had been planned, probably for longer than I wanted to calculate. I drove to the storage facility that afternoon. It was open access with a keypad gate. I sat in the parking lot and watched for 40 minutes. Nothing useful. I noted the unit number range visible from where she parked based on the tracker data, and I wrote it down. That evening she left at 1048. I let her go. I sat at the kitchen table for 4 minutes. Then I got in my truck and I followed. I parked on the far side of the facility lot, against the fence line, facing away from the entrance. Used my mirrors. She went to Unit 114. I watched her unlock it with a key from her jacket pocket. Not a combination, a physical key. And go inside. She was in there for 37 minutes. When she came out, she was carrying nothing visible. She relocked the unit, got back in her Civic, drove to her uncle's apartment, and stayed 22 minutes before coming home. She brought back a container of leftover soup her uncle had sent for me. I ate the soup. I told her it was good. It was good. That night I thought about everything I'd signed in the past 2 years without reading carefully. Every document she'd set in front of me. She handled the finances, my suggestion, actually. She was better with numbers, more organized. I was running a crew and coming home tired, and she'd offered, and I'd been grateful. I handed it to her willingly. That's what trust looks like from the inside. It looks like delegation. It looks like teamwork. It looks exactly like stupidity once the angle shifts. I called my cousin again at midnight from the backyard. He picked up on the second ring. I need to get into that storage unit, I said. No, he said immediately. You need to go to the police. I didn't want to go to the police yet. I wanted to know who else was involved. Because $38,000 moved to a Georgia LLC by a medical billing coordinator making $41,000 a year was not a solo operation. Someone had set that company up. Someone knew how to structure transfers. Someone was either guiding her or using her. I went back to the storage facility the next morning with a legitimate reason. I rented a unit. Unit 199, 5 doors down from hers. Cash. Month to month. The counterstaff was a teenager who cared about nothing and remembered less. From Unit 19, I could hear when Unit 114 opened and closed. I sat in there for 2 hours on a folding chair with a notepad and a coffee and felt like a person I didn't recognize. She didn't come that day. She came the following Tuesday. I heard the key in the lock at 2:12 p.m. I heard voices, 2 of them. I stepped out of my unit quietly, timing it for a moment, when I heard movement inside 114 rather than talking. I walked past the open door without stopping, head forward, like I was heading to the exit. 2 seconds of peripheral vision, my wife standing near a folding table with papers on it, and a man across from her, back slightly turned, maybe late 50s, gray at the temples, sport coat over a collared shirt. The kind of clothes you wear to an office, but not to a storage unit. I got to the end of the row and stood around the corner with my back against the corrugated metal wall and my heart running at about twice its normal rate. I pulled out my phone and switched to the voice memo app. Then I waited. Their voices were muffled but audible through the thin walls. I caught fragments. The name of the LLC. A second account I hadn't known about, apparently at a different institution. Something about timing. Something about the business. My business. My business equipment was listed as an asset on a small business loan application I'd submitted in January. She had helped me prepare the documentation. She had scanned everything and handled the submission because I was on a job site and she had the afternoon free, and I was grateful. The loan had been approved. The equipment was listed. My truck, my tools, 3 company vans, all the specialized gear that had taken me 8 years to accumulate, all of it documented, all of it collateralized. And apparently someone was discussing it in a storage unit. I stood at the corner of that corridor for 19 minutes. When I heard them moving toward the door, I walked back to my unit, let myself in, and sat on the folding chair until I heard Unit 114 lock. Then I followed the sound of footsteps to the lot exit. I got back to my truck before they reached the gate and angled my mirror. The man got into a silver Lexus with a North Carolina plate. I photographed it with my phone. I ran the plate through a contact I have, a guy I grew up with who does private security and sometimes does discrete database queries for people he trusts. He called me back in 3 hours with a name. The name was my father-in-law. Let me be clear about who this man was to me. He and I had spent 6 years building what I genuinely believed was a real relationship. He came to my job site sometimes just to see what I did, said he respected a man who worked with his hands. He'd called me son exactly once, at a family dinner 2 years ago, and I had not forgotten it because I had lost my own father when I was 19, and that word still landed somewhere specific in me. I had trusted this man the way you trust family when you have not been given reasons not to. His daughter had married me. I had believed she chose me. It was beginning to look like she'd been sent. I did not confront anyone. I did not go home and say anything. I drove to a park, sat on a bench by a pond, and spent 90 minutes being a person who had just learned that the architecture of his marriage had been a construction project he wasn't the architect of. When I was done sitting, I called a detective with the Raleigh Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. I'd gotten the name from my cousin who'd gotten it from his firm's legal counsel. 14-year veteran. Handled fraud cases. I went in the next morning with everything. The tracker data. The investment account withdrawal records from Ms. Pratt. The storage unit visit logs I'd written down. The voice memo from outside Unit 114. I was clear that it was partial and likely inadmissible, but that it pointed to specific accounts and a specific individual, the Lexus photograph and the name it came back to. The detective listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "You handled this correctly. Most people blow it by confronting. They tip off the other party. Evidence gets destroyed. Accounts get drained before anyone can freeze them. You sat on it. That's rare." Within 48 hours, they had a forensic accountant reviewing the LLC. Within a week, they had a second account at a credit union in Durham tied to the same beneficial owner, her father. The scheme was structured to liquidate my business assets in stages, starting with the investment account, moving to equipment liens, and eventually to a refinancing play on the house that would have left me with a mortgage I couldn't service on a business that had been quietly hollowed out. It would have looked like a business failure. Businesses fail. marriages end after businesses fail. Clean, gradual, and by the time I understood what had happened, the money would have been somewhere I couldn't follow. He was arrested on a Friday morning. She was arrested the same afternoon, at the clinic, which I learned about secondhand because I was at a job site in Apex when it happened, and my crew supervisor called me to ask if I was okay, because it was all over the local news app. I sat in my truck in the equipment yard, and I thought about that barbecue 7 years ago, her laughing across the yard. The way I'd thought, I need to know that person. I had known her, I think. Completely. The version of her that existed in my house, in my bed, across my dinner table, that person was real. Or real enough that I couldn't tell the difference, and I am not sure those two things are separable in a way that helps you. Knowing the version of someone you were allowed to see is still knowing them. It just isn't knowing everything. Her father received 5 years. She received 3 and was ordered to pay restitution. The LLC was dissolved, and the remaining transferred funds were partially recovered. Not all of it, but enough that the business survived. I refinanced the house in my name only, kept the equipment, finished the year with the best revenue numbers I'd ever had. Not because I was trying to prove something, because the work was still the work, and the work had never lied to me. I still drive past that storage facility sometimes. Route 70, east, toward the county line. I don't slow down. I don't think about Unit 114 or the folding table with the papers or the 19 minutes I stood against a corrugated metal wall piecing together what my life actually was. What I think about, when I'm honest, is the word son. How a man can say a single word and make you feel less alone in the world. How much weight you can put on one word from the right person at the right moment. How that weight, if someone knows it's there, can be used against you. I don't consider that a weakness. I considered it for a long time. I don't anymore. It was just evidence that I was paying attention to the wrong things, which is different from being foolish. Foolish is a character flaw. Paying attention to the wrong things is just misdirection. And misdirection requires a magician. I have no magicians in my life now. I checked. I've thought a lot about the word access. Not in a financial sense, though, that's where it ended up. In the basic human sense. When you love someone, you give them access to your schedule, your accounts, your paperwork, your signature, and eventually to the parts of yourself that don't show up on any document, the grief you carry, the words that land hardest, the people whose approval still matters to you even after you're grown. I gave my father-in-law that last kind of access. He knew about my own father. He knew what that absence felt like to me. He used it methodically and patiently, the way you'd use any other tool. That's the part I had to sit with the longest, not the $38,000. Not the LLC registered in Georgia or the storage unit or the 51 minutes of my wife sitting somewhere I wasn't supposed to know about. The part that took the most time was accepting that someone can identify exactly what you need and offer it to you deliberately, and the need itself is not the problem. Needing connection is not a flaw. Being generous with trust is not a flaw. The flaw was theirs, not mine. And I had to repeat that enough times that it stopped feeling like something I was saying to make myself feel better and started feeling like something that was simply true. What I learned about integrity, real integrity, not the word people put on motivational posters, is that it holds, even when no one is watching. I could have confronted her the night I saw the tracker data from the storage facility. I could have gone home and put everything on the table and let the whole thing dissolve into noise. Instead, I sat with it. I built the case quietly, carefully, because I understood even in the middle of it that acting on emotion was the one thing that would let them walk away clean. Intelligence isn't just knowing things. It's knowing when not to move. That discipline, the ability to stay still when everything in you wants to react, is something I genuinely did not know I had until I needed it. The resilience part came later, after the arrests, after the paperwork, after the days when I drive past the county line on Route 70 and feel the whole thing sitting in my chest like a stone that wouldn't shift. Resilience isn't recovery. Resilience is continuing to operate while the stone is still there. I ran my crew. I finished the contracts. I refinanced the house. I showed up to job sites at 6:45 in the morning and managed problems and made decisions and did the work. Not because I was healed, because the work was the one thing in my life that had never been a performance. My cousin called me 3 months after the trial, asked how I was doing, really doing. I told him I was okay, which was partially true. He said, "You know what you actually did, right?" I said, "I went to the police instead of confronting her." He said, "No, you paid attention. You noticed, you tracked it. You built something solid out of what most people would have either dismissed or blown up." That's the thing. Paying attention is a skill, and most people let it go soft because it's uncomfortable to use. He was right, and I think that's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this. Not the story itself. The story is mine, and it's not a template, but the practice underneath it. Pay attention to what doesn't add up. Don't dismiss the feeling because the explanation sounds reasonable. Build before you act, and when everything is on the line, trust the work, whatever your version of the work is, because it's the one thing that will still be standing when everything else turns out to have been something other than what it appeared. I have no magicians in my life now. I checked.